Section 31. And here, Erasmus, I call to your remembrance your own advice. You just now advised that questions of this kind be omitted, and that Christ crucified be rather taught, and those things which suffice unto Christian piety. But this we're now seeking after and doing. What are we contending for but that the simplicity and purity of the Christian doctrine should prevail, and that those things should be left and disregarded which have been invented and introduced with it by men? But you, who give this advice, do not act according to it yourself. Nay, you act contrary to it. You write diatribes, you exalt the decrees of the popes, you honour the authority of man, and you try all means to draw us aside into these strange things and contrary to the Holy Scriptures. But you consider not the things that are necessary, how that by so doing we should corrupt the simplicity and sincerity of the Scriptures, and confound them with the added inventions of men. From which we plainly discover that you did not give us that advice from your heart, and that you write nothing seriously, but take it for granted that you can, by the empty bulls of your words, turn the world as you please. Whereas you turn them nowhere, for you say nothing whatever but mere contradictions in all things and everywhere, so that he would be most correct who should call you the very Proteus himself, or Vertumnus, or should say with Christ, Physician, heal thyself. The teacher, whose own faults his ignorance prove, has need to hide his head. Until therefore you shall have proved your affirmative, we stand fast in our negative, and in the judgment even of all that company of saints of whom you boast, or rather of the whole world, we dare to say, and we glory in saying, that it is our duty not to admit that which is nothing, and which cannot to a certainty be proved what it is. And you must all be possessed of incredible presumption or of madness, to demand that to be admitted by us for no other reason than because you, as being many, great, and of long standing, choose to assert that which you yourselves acknowledge to be nothing, as though it were a conduct becoming Christian teachers to mock the miserable people in things pertaining to godliness with that which is nothing, as if it were a matter that essentially concerned their salvation. Where is that former acumen of the Grecian talent, which heretofore at least covered lies under some elegant semblage of truth? It now lies in open and naked words. Where is that former dexterously laboured Latinity? It now thus deceives and is deceived by one most empty term. But thus it happens to the senseless or the malicious readers of books. All those things which were the infirmities of the fathers or of the saints, they make to be of the highest authority. The fault, therefore, is not in the authors, but in the readers. It is as though one relying on the holiness and the authority of St. Peter should contend that all that St. Peter ever said was true, and should even attempt to persuade us that it was truth when in Matthew chapter 16 verse 22, from the infirmity of the flesh, he advised Christ not to suffer, or that where he commanded Christ to depart from him out of the ship, Luke chapter 5 verse 8, and many other of those things for which he was rebuked of Christ. Men of this sort are like unto them who, for the sake of ridicule, idly say that all things that are in the gospel are not true, and they catch hold of that, John chapter 8 verse 48, where the Jews say unto Christ, Do we not say well that thou art a Samaritan, and hast a devil? Or that he is guilty of death? Or that we found this fellow perverting our nation, and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar? These do the same thing as those asserters of free will, but for a different end, and not wilfully, but from blindness and ignorance. For they so catch at that which the fathers, falling by the infirmity of the flesh, have said in favour of free will, that they even oppose it to that which the same fathers have elsewhere, in the power of the Spirit, said against free will. Nay, they so urge and force it, that the better is made to give way to the worse. Hence it comes to pass that they give authority to the worse expressions, because they fall in with their fleshly mind, and take it from the better, because they make against their fleshly mind. But why do we not rather select the better? For there are many such in the fathers. To produce an example, what can be more carnally, nay, what more impiously, sacrilegiously, and blasphemously spoken, than that which Jerome is wont to say, Virginity peoples heaven, and marriage the earth, as though the earth and not heaven was intended for the patriarchs, the apostles, and Christian husbands, or as though heaven was designed for Gentile vestal virgins who are without Christ. And yet these things and others of the same kind the sophists collect out of the fathers, that they may procure unto them authority, carrying all things more by numbers than by judgment. As that disgusting carpenter of Constance did, who lately made that jewel of his, the stable of Augeas, a present to the public, that there might be a something to cause nausea and vomit in the pious and the learned. Section 32. And now, while I am making these observations, I will reply to that remark of yours where you say that it is not to be believed that God would overlook an error in his church for so many ages, and not reveal to any one of his saints that which we contend for as being the grand essential of the Christian doctrine. In the first place, we do not say that this error was overlooked of God in his church, or in any one of his saints, for the church is ruled by the Spirit of God, and the saints are led by the Spirit of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 14. And Christ is with his church even unto the end of the world. Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. And the church is the pillar and ground of the truth. First book of Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. These things I say we know, for the creed which we all hold runs thus: I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, so that it is impossible that she can err even in the least article. And even if we should grant that some of the elect are held in error through the whole of their life, yet they must of necessity return into the way of truth before their death, for Christ says, in John chapter 10, verse 28, No one shall pluck them out of my hand. But this is the labour, this the point, whether it can be proved to a certainty that those whom you call the church were the church, or rather, whether having been in error throughout their whole life, they were at last brought back before death. For this will not easily be proved, if God suffered all those most learned men whom you adduce to remain in error through so long a series of ages. Therefore God suffered his church to be in error. But look at the people of Israel, where during so many kings and so long a time not one king is mentioned who never was in error. And under Elijah the prophet, all the people and everything that was public among them had so gone away into idolatry that he thought that he himself was the only one left. Whereas, while the kings, the princes, the prophets, and whatever could be called the people or the church of God was going to destruction, God was reserving to himself 7,000. Romans chapter 11, verse 4. But who could see these or know them to be the people of God? And who even now dares to deny that God, under all these great men, for you make mention of none but men in some high office or of some great name, was reserving to himself a church among the commonalty, and suffering all those to perish after the example of the kingdom of Israel? For it is peculiar to God to restrain the elect of Israel, and to slay their fat ones, but to preserve the refuse and remnant of Israel. Psalm 78, verse 31, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 9, chapter 10, verses 20 to 22, chapter 11, verses 11 to 16. What happened under Christ himself, when all the apostles were offended at him, when he was denied and condemned by all the people, and there were only a Joseph, a Nicodemus, and a thief upon the cross preserved? Were they then said to be the people of God? There was indeed a people of God remaining, but it was not called the people of God, and that which was so called was not the people of God. And who knows who are the people of God, when throughout the whole world from its origin the state of the church was always such that those were called the people and saints of God who were not so, while others among them who were as a refuse and were not called the people and saints of God were the people and saints of God, as is manifest in the histories of Cain and Abel, of Ishmael and Isaac, of Esau and Jacob. Look again at the age of the Arians, when scarcely 5 Catholic bishops were preserved throughout the whole world, and they, driven from their places, while the Arians reigned, everywhere bearing the public name and office of the Church. Nevertheless, under these heretics Christ preserved his Church, but so that it was the least thought or considered to be the Church. Again, show me under the kingdom of the Pope one bishop discharging his office. Show me one council in which their transactions were concerning the things pertaining to godliness, and not rather concerning gowns, dignities, revenues, and other baubles, which they could not say without being mad pertain to the Holy Spirit. Nevertheless they are called the Church, when all, at least who live as they do, must be reprobates and anything but the Church. And yet even unto them Christ preserved his Church, though it was not called the Church. How many saints must you imagine those of the Inquisition have for some ages burned and killed, as John Hus and others, in whose time no doubt there lived many holy men of the same spirit? Why do you not rather wonder at this, Erasmus, that there ever were from the beginning of the world more distinguished talents, greater erudition, more ardent pursuit among the world in general than among Christians or the people of God? As Christ himself declares, the children of this world are wiser than the children of light. Luke chapter 16, verse 8. What Christian can be compared, to say nothing of the Greeks, with Cicero alone for talent, for erudition, or for indefatigability? What shall we say then was the preventive cause that no one of them was able to attain unto grace, who certainly exerted free will with its utmost powers? Who dares say that there was no one among them who contended for truth with all his efforts? And yet we must affirm that no one of them all attained unto it. Will you here too say it is not to be believed that God would utterly leave so many great men throughout such a series of ages, and permit them to labour in vain? Certainly, if free will were anything or could do anything, it must have appeared and wrought something in those men, at least in some one instance, but it availed nothing, nay, it always wrought in the contrary direction. Hence by this argument only it may be sufficiently proved that free will is nothing at all, since no proof of it can be produced even from the beginning of the world to the end.